number one, why is the U.S. finance system so unique in the world? What is it that makes it unique? As I kind of looked at this question, Ty, I thought a little bit about the history. And at the end of the day, it probably begins with the fact that our country was kind of the first one out there that really employed freedom and had the Constitution and all these different things, freedom of speech, separating church and state, just a lot of the things that we see in the Constitution. And that started, of course, in 1776 with the U.S. Revolution. And then after that, you started to see other countries that really started to follow that model around Europe and other areas. In democracy, they always talk about saving democracy and whatnot. But really, democracy and this ability to have more freedom really creates a financial system where there's so many benefits. And so that's kind of the first thing that I thought about. What are some of your takeaways or thoughts when you think about what is it that makes the U.S. finance system so unique compared to other countries?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just the free market, Leo. When you look at this, technically lending's been around from, there's loans going out in the Bible if you really break it down. So the concept of lending is as old as time, but in all reality, the U.S. has been an astronomical piece of actually commercializing it and building these enterprise companies and having the ability so that everybody can get credit cards and everybody can get loans. And that is one thing. There's a lot of things I don't think the government has done a great job with, but they have done a good job of kind of getting out of the way, protecting a lot of these lenders, but also allowing them to actually get credit cards out, to get loans out so that everyone can qualify.
Yeah, no question about it. I was watching this interesting series. I think it was on CNBC, and it was called American Dynasty. And in this series, it would literally take some of the top entrepreneurs in the world, from Henry Ford to John D. Rockefeller, Getty, all these guys that had built massively successful businesses back in the day. And one of the key reasons that helped some of these businesses was the ability of the American finance system to help them. So, for example, with Henry Ford, his goal was, his dream, like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates' dream was to have a computer on every desk in every house in America, and they certainly accomplished that. But Henry Ford's dream was, hey, I want to have the common man have the ability to drive a car around, to get some freedom, to not have to depend on that horse and feeding, and the horse can break down, but have a car that can go faster, further, and get you there safer. And that was his dream. And in order to make that happen, he created the Model T. And this automobile was affordable, it was reliable, and it was also very plain. But he just really revolutionized the entire world by bringing the automobile. But the automobile wouldn't have made it as far as it did without the ability for the American consumer to be able to finance that automobile. So the American finance system allowed people to go out and get car loans with small down payments back then. This is even in the 1900s, the early 1900s, the teens there, 1920s, and people started to be able to finance, and more people started getting cars, and they were getting this Ford Model T because it was affordable and because they could finance it with affordable payments with the American finance system. And so throughout history, those have been key components. And the interesting thing is, you go outside the United States and you realize that financing is much more difficult outside of the U.S.
It's like when you break it down, the American dream is the American dream because debt existed, right? The American dream would be no different if there wasn't debt to be able to bring on and get homes and get vehicles so that you can actually go out and achieve what you wanted to achieve. So it's kind of interesting when you break it down. So many people are so scared of debt, but the American dream did not exist without debt, in my opinion.
No, it doesn't. And then some of the top businesses in the world only exist because they were able to access funding, finance, and capital. And so, you can go through all of these different businesses. I love Phil Knight's story with Nike because he actually started it really without any investor money. He saved up a little money himself, and he brought on a business partner, and they were able to get some inventory, and they had these shoes called Tiger shoes that were coming from Japan, and they were being manufactured at an affordable rate. He could bring them to the U.S. and sell them for a profit. And then eventually he went out and he created his own manufacturing context and started to manufacture Nike shoes. and kind of went from there. But over and over in his book that he had come out just a few years ago called Shoe Dog. And if you haven't read this book, it's so amazing. In fact, it's great to listen to on Audible. And surprisingly enough, sometimes I'll recommend these books to my kids, and I'm trying to get them to listen to different entrepreneurial books and stories. And this one is such a story. It's like this epic story where Phil Knight is growing up, and he grows up in Oregon. I think his dad was part of maybe a newspaper owner or something like that. His dad was a successful business owner, and so Phil Knight gets out of college where he ran track because he's a big track runner. Long distance cross country type track back in the 60s is when he was running track. And so he convinces his dad to let him go around the world. His dad gives him a little bit of money. He goes to Hawaii with his friend, and they both start falling in love with these girls, and they get jobs, and they're hanging out in Hawaii, and his friend's like, yeah, bro, I'm just going to stay here and surf 10 and hook up with my girl, and life is good. And Phil Knight's like, bro, I'm going around the world, man. I'll see you later. So he makes enough money from his job in Hawaii, plus what his dad gave him, goes to Japan, goes around the world, does all these things. When he gets back, he's like, I saw these amazing running shoes in Japan. I'm going to start a business where people have better shoes. And he keeps his full-time job. He's an accountant by trade from college. And he gets that business off the ground. And over again, he starts by building relationships, business credit, if you will, with these local banks in Oregon. He gets a loan from one, gets a loan from another. He's literally robbing Peter to pay Paul. And he's not taking any money for himself, no profits for the first several years in the business that becomes Nike. And then he kind of taps out his resources there, and then he goes to California and he builds relationships with lenders there, other lenders across the country in different states, and he uses this debt from the American finance system, and he's literally convincing these banks to give him money for his business against his shoe inventory, and eventually he's able to go public with it. They pay off all the debt. They're able to win big, and we all know the number one sports apparel and certainly sports shoe company in the world is Nike. And if you ever listen to that book, you'll come away with two things. Wow, Nike could have gone out of business a million times, but it survived because of Phil Knight and because it was in the American finance system. If he was in other countries of the world that don't have access to loans and funding for businesses, then Nike does not exist today.
I think you could say the same thing about hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that we use on a daily basis. One thought that came to mind, Leo, I get a lot of people on phone calls. They're constantly asking this same question of, you hear the Phil Knight story, and it's like, he says he went 2 years and didn't pay himself a dime. How is he paying his rent? How is he paying for food? How is he getting fuel in his car? When they say, I didn't pay myself a dime, does that mean they didn't take any profits? Does that mean they literally didn't take a dime? Explain that situation, because I think a lot of business owners think that means they literally didn't pay themselves a penny.
In that case, he actually didn't. He actually didn't pay himself a penny. What he did was two things. Number one, those first 2 to 3 years before the business was making enough money to pay him, he was working full-time 30 to 40 hours a week as an accountant at another firm, and then he was working another 30 to 40 hours a week building up Nike, and even had employees that he was paying at Nike, but he couldn't pay himself for those first 2 or 3 years. I think that's what it was. And then eventually, as he was able to make progress, but still he would kind of borrow money and maybe pay himself a small salary, but still wasn't very profitable to do that. And he did that for a while. There's another guy that I followed for a long time, Andy Frisella. He's the 75 Hard Challenge guy, has a supplement company. In his first 10 years, he's famous for telling people that he literally, I think, made, I want to say $59,000 his first 10 years running that business. Now, he started at age 18, had no idea what he was doing, and finally by age 28, social media came around, and he really started to understand marketing and build a team, and he's made a fortune since then. But he also had another job so that he could pay his bills, pay for his rent, while he was kind of building that business at the same time. So yeah, obviously you have to build or survive. That's where business funding comes in. Sometimes you're using the funding to pay your own personal bills for a few months until you get off the ground. But oftentimes where people talk about, oh, you should just go all in and quit all your jobs and just go all in with your business, I think there's a lot of stories out there where people did exactly what you did, where you worked that full-time job start that business on the side and build it up to where it's big enough that now your personal finances are taken care of, and then you go all in with the business. Sarah Blakely did that with Spanx. There's a number of different business owners that did it just like that, and that's the smarter way to do it, because if you can't pay your own bills, it's pretty tough to stay in business.
Yeah, so if the business can't afford to pay you yet, from what I'm grasping is there's a few different things people will do. They'll either number one, generate enough savings before they officially launch the business. Number two, they'll run their business at crazy hours of the night, at early hours of the morning, while they can still work a normal 9 to 5 or whatever job they have to. Or the business gets some credit, the business gets some funding, and they use the business financials to pay things like rent and food and those necessary things you have to have, but they're not taking a dime more. Would you say those are the three major options?
100%. Yep, that's exactly right. And that's kind of what we did when we started this business. And so many other successful entrepreneurs have done the exact same thing to get their businesses off the ground. So it is one of those things where you delay the gratification, you sacrifice with a bigger vision. But in each example, they knew they had something, right? There was a proof of concept where, hey, I've got a product or a service that people really want and need, and now I just need to figure out how to make my product really good and better than competition, and then how can I market it and get it out to the masses? And that's kind of what each of them have done in that situation. But coming back to our topic, like, if they're not in the United States of America, I don't think there's any Nike. I don't think there's any Under Armour. I don't think there's not a Microsoft. There's not an Apple. Like, these companies would not exist without the American finance system that kind of opens the door to access money and capital. And it starts kind of with secured, right? You're getting loans against houses and cars, real assets that if you don't pay them back, you get their money. But there's still a lot of countries around the world where you can't even do that. It's like, hey, yeah, you want to buy your house? Cool. I need 50% down. So if you're buying a house for $500,000, you need $250,000 cash. That's going to be tough for a lot of people. You think about that. And that credit system that we've got in this country is what makes everything work. And then it just comes down to two things. Number one, are people going to follow through and pay it back? And number two, are the people giving out the money making good decisions? And so you think back to like 2008 and 2009 when, people were a little irresponsible, and certainly lenders in Wall Street were very irresponsible, doing no income, no asset mortgages, back in the day for people to buy properties with no money down, no skin in the game, not even verifying their income. Well, I wonder why that didn't work out. And those are things that happen. And now the system's corrected itself. I don't think you'll ever see that come back. And now, as you can attest, you and I have got millions of dollars in mortgages. It's never easy. It's always difficult.
In fact, I think we're shifting to the opposite of that.
And we may be.
Right. I think we're shifting to more of an open banking, open finance. They don't care so much about your credit score as they do, can you actually afford this, because you've synced up and connected all of your accounts. They look at transaction history, income history. They do all of that based off of viewing your open banking account. So be interesting to see.
It will. And so really that's where fintech is so important. If you're not utilizing fintech and AI in your personal financial life, you're making things more difficult. Like you said, that myfigures.com money app, there are always different things in the spending reports there. We're like, oh my word, what is this? What is this bill coming through here? What is this? And you can find all sorts of mistakes and errors that happen, and things that should have been canceled that are still charging on a monthly subscription, and ways to generate better income as a business owner, etc. One of the common questions we get over and over again is, I've got clients in Europe or clients in Canada or clients in Asia, Australia. They need financing for training for a business. Are there some good options for them? We get asked these questions all the time, and the answer is surprising.
It is surprising, and the answer is no. I mean, there's obviously some options, right? You're in Canada, there's a few different 0% interest cards that you can go out and get, but we're talking a few 0% interest cards to hundreds here in the US market. So it's one of these things you're so handcuffed in these other countries, Leo. And Canada's, I think, considered one of the better ones when it comes to credit and funding. And even in Canada, it's so tricky and everything's so controlled by the government.
It is. And in Europe, you have all these countries. They're kind of part of the same union, but they're still separate countries with somewhat separate financial systems. And so the lenders pretty much they're almost like 100 years into the past Where 100 years in the past, it was really tough for a small business owner to get any type of loan, even with proven revenues and history. If you weren't a really big business owner, you didn't have an asset like a home or real estate with no debt on it. It was tough 100 plus years ago to get money, even in the U.S., but it was certainly ahead of every other country. And now you fast forward to 2023, and it's really difficult to access money for a business in Europe. It's difficult. It's damn near impossible in Africa, most of the Middle East, Asia. Australia has some options. Canada has some options. England and France have some options. Germany. But without collateral, there's very little in the way. So I'd say that one of the biggest revolutions that's happened in the American finance system in the last 30, 40 years has been the ability to access money and finance based off of credit and not based off of assets. Because back in the day, like everything in outside of the U.S., and people, y'all don't get this. You don't understand that the only way you get any type of financing outside of the U.S. is by having a hard asset like a piece of equipment, a car, a home, a 401k, an investment, like something easily transferable to get my money back if you don't pay me back. And that's how most of the world functions except for the U.S. And that's what makes our system work, is it makes it much easier for people to access money, which then comes back to, I think, the real key at the end of the day here is the credit system. It's actually not just the financial system, but it's the credit system that the U.S. has built that no one else seems to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because we talk so negatively on the credit system all the time, like, oh, it's such a broken system. But in all reality, it's the most perfect system in the entire world. Sure, improvements need to be made, and they are being made, right? We're on FICO 9, right? Where there's all these different variations of FICO scores. There's Vantage scores. There's so many different credit scores out there. So they are constantly changing. They are constantly adapting. And they're learning that for a mortgage, we want to look at this score. For an auto loan, we want to look at this score. So we really do have a very impressive credit system. Yes, I would like to see more of an open finance, open banking type model that also relies on the credit score. So it's not just credit score or nothing, because I think sometimes, like you and I see it all the time. We have someone that we look at their credit score and it's a 690, but they've got good accounts, they've got good history, they've got no negative, and it's like, what on earth is going on here? Something's wrong. Those are the people I feel bad for, but overall, it's a very, very impressive system.
It is, and if you look outside the United States, the credit systems out there, there isn't an Experian in every single country across the world. There isn't an Equifax or a TransUnion credit bureau out there. And the interesting thing is there's always this confusion where, the credit bureaus are part of the government. They're part of this financial system. They are part of the system, but they are not government entities. They're actually for-profit entities, which actually, of course, makes them run more efficiently because they are owned by actual shareholders and they're a private business. They're not controlled by the government. There are laws they have to follow and abide by. But at the end of the day, this credit system has made it to where people and businesses can access money, live the American dream, and that dream does not exist outside of the U.S., and most of it is because there isn't a well-developed credit bureau system where credit bureaus are out there working with all these different lenders to track that people are making their payments, they're paying them on time, and that people are generating a credit score. Because if without that system, how else would you decide, I'm going to give you $100,000 to buy that home, but I don't actually know what your credit history was? And so back in the day, 100, 200 years ago, you were actually literally building a relationship with a handshake at the bank, and everything was on a local level. And it would be like, hey, yeah, you can put your property up, or you have a business, and you built that reputation in the community, and the lenders literally were lending off of your good credit reputation that you've built with the local bank.